Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session with Khalid Shamis. I'm very, very excited for this session. We are going to be talking about editing for documentaries. My name is Makawa Gaba, and I am a project support officer at the Center for Creative Arts. I'd like to welcome everyone to this session. Please do engage with us. If you have questions, please write them on a chat box. Just make sure that if you are not speaking, you mute your microphone. We could never be able to have these sessions without our audiences, and we'd like to extend sincere gratitude to everyone who's been tuning in to the sessions and to the audiences, people who have been watching our films. You've got until Sunday, so yeah, happy binging this weekend. I would also just like to thank our sponsors for making this possible, especially the National Film and Video Foundation, who is the main sponsor of this session. Now, before I hand over to Khalid, let me tell you a little bit about him. So he was born in London, half Libyan, half South African. He directs and edits documentaries, and although at vastly different paces, he says that his own films take numerous years to finish, whereas he constructs and completes several films a year as an editor. He has worked with some of the leading filmmakers in South Africa and has gathered a few awards along the way. He studied film in the UK, trained as a director in London, and focused on editing in South Africa. He is part of the SAGE/Encounters Rough Cut Lab. He holds the South African Guild of Editors acronym, and he is a PhD candidate at the CHR in the History Department at UWC. Wow, quite a lot on your plates, Mr. Khalid. And welcome.
Thank you. Yeah. It's more of a bowl, a lot on my bowl. So
a lot on your bowl.
You can actually get more in.
And nothing falls off.
Yeah, exactly. No, yeah, thank you. Nice to meet you, and nice to be part of all your sessions. It's really, there've been some really great sessions during the week, and I wish you luck with all of them for future. I mean, I think we need more of these kind of interactions with practitioners. I mean, with editors also, we don't really speak to each other, right? And we don't speak to the cinematographers or the sound people on set. Even when it goes to the grade and for the mix, we really have the conversation with directors and producers in the building of the story. So these conversations are good to kind of break out of those spaces. And because the editing space is also, it's considered a very private space, and to some a kind of sacred space, and it needs that as well. But at the same time, we need to open it. We need to break those walls and allow more people freely into that space.
All right. Now, something that struck me is that you say it takes numerous years to complete your own films, whereas you construct a lot of films, you make a lot of films within a year. Could you tell us more about that?
Well, the films I make myself as a director are personal films, right? And they're films, they're family films about my family. I wouldn't be able to go out there and make a film that wasn't something I was deeply involved with from my life, right? I can't get into that space of finding a new story to make, like the career filmmaker, in that traditional sense. Nothing wrong with it, right? We all want to tell stories, but for me, myself, but also I think I prefer that editing space when we're talking now about like long form documentary films, which are usually personal. There's less responsibility on me as an editor in the end. There is and there isn't, right? So it leaves the room, or it leaves the editing space in its finished form, and then has its life. And then it's like, it's on you as a director or a producer to carry that. And I don't want that responsibility necessarily. Yeah. So, but when I'm making my own films, it needs the time, and that responsibility is something that lives with you for a while, right? So when you do take up this mission to make it to tell a story in this way, then you're in it for the long haul, right?
Yeah.
It's not just when the film is finished and it's in the festivals. You still got to travel with it, and you still got to answer those questions about the film, about what was not in the film, about what's in the film, right? And about, so you still have to, you live with it, right? It's part of your life from then on. So, yeah, I mean, and also the films that I've made, I mean, they take a long time because that's the time they need to take. Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Now I remember a few years when you released the Imam and I, and it was literally everywhere, you know, huge splash. And now we also have your film right now showing as part of our of TIFF this year, The Colonel's Stray Dogs. What would you say you learned from making the Imam and I in terms of editing, which you kind of prepared you or made you, I don't know, a better editor when you approached the new project?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, because actually it did prepare me for this film. I mean, it prepared me for all the other films I worked on as an editor after that. So knowing the scope and knowing what goes into the whole process for the filmmakers, right? So in the editing space, with these films, the director comes in and it's not just the story you're trying to hold, the history of the story and characters in the material, but it's also the life experience and anxiety of the filmmaker comes into the edit suite. Yeah. So there's lots of things you need to hold. So making Imam film, I understood that, what went into it. It's not just material and archive that comes, it's a whole life that comes with the filmmaker and all those relationships and stuff. And so that prepared me, or what prepared me most for my second film, making Imam, was because I'm in both films. They're both personal stories. They're both about my family. And it got me over that obstacle of seeing myself on the screen and working with myself as a character, right, in the material. So, you know, it's kind of a strange space. You're looking at yourself, but you don't like the way, you know, you kind of have that turn of head or profile or whatever. So it quickly got me into this space of getting over that idea of working with myself as a character in the material. So then I could, when it came to editing Stray Dogs, it's fine. I'm a character now, rather than that's me. How do I deal with myself? But that's why filmmakers who make films about themselves need another editor to look at them in the third person, yeah, and to deal with them in that way. It's not easy to make a film about yourself and then to edit it. It's not easy because there are things that you can't get over. So that Imam helped me to get over that. You know?
All right, and you say it's not easy. What challenges do you have exactly?
In terms of what, making a film like that?
Yeah, you know, when you're making a film about yourself, you know, it's not easy at all. So what challenges do you think you have to wrestle with? And
yeah, I mean, the challenges we all have in the filmmaking world are, you know, budgetary and time, right? Usually it's money and time. But in this kind of thing, the challenge is really being honest, right? How can I be honest in the film, in what I say in the film about my grandfather or about my dad or to them, and in narration and stuff. How do I, because we all want to kind of make these films and we all want them to be poetic. Yeah. So in that kind of poetry narration, it becomes pompous, right? And you become like you become a poser, right? Because you're trying to be flowery and you're trying to create emotion where maybe there's already emotion. If there's already emotion in a scene or between two characters, once you layer it with more kind of flowery dialogue, it ceases to underscore what you're trying to say. It actually is counterproductive. So the challenge is to be honest with what you're saying, right? And so that comes through in the film without being arrogant or pompous. And it's not easy. It's not an easy balance. That's why you always need a second person or third person to point it out, right? And so it's. I mean, at the best of times, it's hard for us to be honest with ourselves anyway. And now we're making a film about ourselves, so it's a very narcissistic process making a first film. How do you make that without being a narcissist, right? Or with acknowledging it, but at the same time moving on with the story. So it's not easy. That balance is not easy, and it stays with you. It stays with you until you're recording your voice in the sound booth for the mix. Up to that point, the script is always changing in order to get that authenticity. So you've got to find different ways of writing the voice, of constructing the narration, right? So in that sense, you're always back to square one. You're always in the space of conceptualizing the story, right? Even when you've done all the cutting and all the shooting and you're right at the end, you still have to go back to that initial space of integrity and bring that in, and maintain it.
Yeah. And, again, being objective has remained a discussion, whether you're making a film about yourself or you've got different subjects. Being objective, is just, in a way, for me, it's elusive. But how do you strive for that in your work?
I think the trick is not to be objective, right? You have to to lay your cards out. You have to take a stance, and it's okay during the process or during the telling of the story for that to change. But this idea of objectivity within the filmmaking, I mean, doesn't really exist. As soon as you put a camera in front of someone, you're taking a position. You're literally taking a side. Right? You're on this side of the camera, and they're there.
Yep.
And so I think the trick is to be honest with yourself and not to be objective and say, like, this is a story I want to tell, right? Was Gaddafi a good guy or not? And it's not as clear as that either. So you can, illustrate. And even in my film, I don't say that, he was a bad guy, right? But I do kind of show him, show the other side of him that we, especially in Africa, we don't really agree with or relate with Gaddafi. He's kind of like a friend of ours, a comrade, right, on the continent, rather than this kind of figure who was trying to kill my dad.
Yep.
And by extension, trying to kill us or to get rid of us. So, of course, there's a complexity there, right?
All right, and then what is your process? What would you say is your process?
So in terms of editing, so it's interesting to talk about editing because it's all, how you use material, right? How you work with visual material. So in a discussion like this, I would specifically choose not to show you anything. I could say, right, let's look at a scene and let's look at how we got to this place in the scene, or look at a structure of an edit timeline. Because everyone works differently, but mainly there is a lot of talking. There's a lot of discussion. Or for me anyway, as an editor, the first 1 or 2 days or longer than that with the director is a lot of talking. We don't start cutting until we're on the same page as to what is in the material and what kind of story you want to tell, and what I can bring to it. So there's a lot of talking, and so editing, that's part of my process, is just to talk and discuss and to scribble and to write on a whiteboard to try to figure it out. And so the initial necessary step is to talk a lot. And even during the editing process, you need those breaks to discuss. And it's not just to discuss to figure out what the story is, it's to figure out if you take a director and an editor, if you can now have a relationship that's going to last for the next 3-4 months or over a year, right? When you keep coming to each other. So for me, it's about now, I'm going to introduce, or to what extent do I want this person in my life? And to what extent do they want me in their life? And we need to sit down and have that discussion. And I'm probably at an age where I'm not sure if I want to.
Yeah.
I do, but at the same time, I don't have the time and space. I edit from home, so sometimes my kids are in here, so I need to let you know as a director that you're in my kind of family space, and my kids come in and out, and that's part of the thing. And I'm going to start at a certain time, and then I have to finish at a certain time. So all of that talking is in order just to get to know a new person in your life, regardless of whether the film is, regardless of the film, actually. For me, it's really about that relationship. Maybe earlier in your career, in one's career, you want to do as much as you can. So you don't have the luxury of picking and choosing who you want to work with. Yeah. And it's not easy. There are lots of people, lots of challenges, lots of challenging people in the industry. And so you have to work. So I guess later, when you're more experienced, you're more established, then you have that luxury of the time and space to feel out whether or not you can work with each other, right? So regardless, so there's a difference there between the editor and the editing. Yeah. But we can come to that.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. Now, speaking of experience, when you look back at The Imam and I, are there any editing choices that you would change?
No, I don't think so. If I look at that film, I don't think so. I'm kind of quite happy how it played out. So I made that film, I finished it in 2011. And then so my grandmother was still alive, and then she passed away 2019, right? And in 2019, Al Jazeera came around that time, and they started to make a film about Imam Harun, right? Al Jazeera style, which is quite different from mine. And I saw that film, and they kind of did quite a good job. And I that exact same question you said to me, I thought about, like, how would I have made that film now or differently? And I guess it's a question of style and taste, but I would have still probably made it in a very personal way about the family and all of that. I don't think I would have done anything differently. I guess we didn't have. I would have shot the film in like a higher format, because it's SD and it's 4:3, right? And it's only like 10, 15 years ago. So I would have maybe done it, at a higher production value. But at the same time, that SD feeling of the film allows for more of the intimacy in the family space. So it actually, I think, brings you closer into that family space of the film. So it serves the story, Yeah. So I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, and then now films evolve or maybe even change in the edit room. And, you mentioned that you just have to put all your cards out there. And now I guess I just want to understand, how then do you approach making a docu, or when you already have some kind of bias, as you have said, the moment you put a camera in front of a person, you've taken a side. So you start a project with some kind of bias, and then it changes a lot when you've shot it and you're now in the edit room. And so I think my advice is, how important is it? My question is to you, how important is it to stick to the original story you wanted to tell, or to just let the film run, live the way it live the life it wants to live?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, even if you know that things are going to change, because we live and things have changed in our life, we know things are going to change, but we still want to stick with an initial idea as well, which is also relates to the idea of, as independent filmmakers, we the money that we raise initially is usually based on that initial concept, that you pitch.
Yeah.
And then you find in the edit, always in the edit, the material is not talking about what's in your pitch, right? It's in your treatment, your proposal. So you have this kind of conflict, like, oh my God, I'm about to, or we're making a film that's different from the film we proposed. So where does that leave me with the funders? Yeah, because they're expecting something else. So it's tricky. So those, I personally think all those initial ideas of whatever story you want to make come from a truer place than the politics of the cinematic internal, as we can call it, like in a kind of class that is very much aspirational towards a kind of American or Euro-American way of making films, which is about the funding and the processes, and we want to please out the audience. And when whenever they say, who's your audience? It's always like, oh, I want, it needs to be international. But what does that mean? It needs to speak to an international audience. Usually means, if you read between the lines, it means it needs to be understood by Europeans and Americans. Yeah,
of course.
Problematic, because now you're kind of compromising your craft, you're compromising your storytelling, you're compromising your own integrity, and you're not honoring fully the characters in your film, your grandmother, the guy who's did that interview and now has passed away. So it's very important to maintain that initial integrity of what you're making, what film you wanted to make, taking into account all the changes and all the politics that come around, all the money that comes around, and then also understanding that when you come to edit, the material is going to start telling you something else. Yeah, and depends also who you're editing with, how they read it, and you've got to be open for that. You've got to be open for the idea that the film I went to film is not in the material. It might be there a little bit, but it might. Usually, the material points to something else, and you've got to go with it. I think a mark of a good filmmaker, especially a good director, is someone who's open to that. And I've seen many directors who are South African directors who are open to that change and kind of go with it. And we, along the way, I think, the editor usually, it becomes this kind of support structure, right? And it becomes an ally. Sometimes even, an ally not against, or to support the director when they're arguing with the producer. Yeah, the editor has the support, right? So you become these comrades, which talks back to, again, the relationship in the room. And so why am I saying that? Is because to be open for that material to be talking to you in a different way, right? So good directors will maintain that. But there's always at some point, you always have to go back to the initial intention. Like, why? I'm always asking questions like, why? I'm always kind of myself in the space of like an imbecile. Like, I don't, tell me why, even if it's obvious. Like, why are we making this? Why did you shoot this? Who's this character? Why does that, why does that need to be in there? So you're constantly asking yourself, always takes you back to your initial intention around why we're making them.
Now it's funny because I always find it amusing in a way that a film is always owned by the director. You make a film, my character of a film if I've directed it. Whereas you've got this person who's got so much potential to change the film during the edits. And so I think with that said, I just want to know, whose film is it anyway?
Look, I think the film, it depends what kind of film, right? But usually with these kind of independent personal films, I think it belongs to the people in the film who are being represented, right? And how they're being represented, whether, my film in a way belongs to Gaddafi, but it's not the kind of film he'd want to make or he'd want to see. But it belongs to him. It belongs to my dad. It belongs to my mum. It belongs to my brothers and sister. Of course, it belongs to me, but we all share it in a way. It belongs to the producers, the co-producers. But in terms of, I think what you're saying is around authorship and the editor as author. Yeah.
Yes.
It's very. I think it comes with a certain amount of experience and your own voice as an editor. And you'll find after making a few films that you start to have a voice, however that is, how you work with music or how you treat characters on screen or how you structurally build a film talks to a specific kind of voice. So there are, I think after the Imam film, I made a few films. I edited Nadine Kluter's Action Commandant and Aliki Saragas' Striker Rock. Even this and some films with Simon Wood, even film, my film, Colin Straight Up. If you look at them together, you can see that there's a similarity. And I've been told by other people who saw a film I worked on and said, did you edit that film? Or they're watching it and they're like, oh, Khalid, I think, and then you wait to the credits and the name is there. So it's just about, so there's authorship there, right? So in a way, it's not about the film belonging to the director necessarily, but I think also what you're pointing at is like, why should the director get all the accolades if so much of it is done by... And some filmmakers have been very kind enough to give me a writing credit, like Sarah Gouveia on Sound of Masks gave me a writing credit, and also with Dylan Valley on Africaps. And it's not something I asked for, right? But it's kind enough for them to recognize that I was very integral to the writing of the story in the cut. So it's there. And a good producer or a good director will always acknowledge the authorship or the collaboration of an editor. And a good shooter and a good grade, colorist, all of those things. Yeah.
All right. Now, you spoke about the film also belonging to the people that it represents. And are you able to tell us about the people that this particular film represents, and if you've received any feedback from them, and if you are actually even looking for feedback from them?
Yeah, I guess we're talking about the Stray Dogs, yeah?
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, a big thing of mine was because I didn't show a cut to my dad for a long time, or my mum. And so I was quite anxious and anxious about showing them the film. My father, for a long time, he was always referring to it as our film, like, how's our film going? When I was trying to raise the money and editing, like, how's our film? So that puts me in a position like, okay, I'm going to make the film my way, but yeah, of course I understand. And when I showed it to him, he comes from this kind of journalistic background. So he would appreciate the Al Jazeera kind of version of that style. Yeah. And so when he saw the film, one of my opening lines is, he felt like loving Libya was, he loved Libya more than us as a family.
Okay.
Right. And my sister was watching it because they watched it in London, and my sister watched it with him. And then when that line comes on, it's within the first 2-3 minutes. she looked at him like, whoa, how can you say that about your dad? So I think he wasn't expecting the film to be so personal. But at the same time, he appreciated the fact that, because he was worried about me putting him on a pedestal. Because the whole Libyan diaspora and the Libyan exile space and the going back to Libya after Gaddafi is a very contested space. It's very fraught politically. So he was quite worried, actually, that his other comrades and colleagues in Libya would be like, oh, Ashur's son is making a film about him. Of course, it's going to be, lauding him and putting him on a pedestal. So he was worried about that, like how he would be perceived after that. But the film doesn't do that, really. It kind of tries to tell an honest story. It doesn't say that he was the liberator of Libya, the big man story, which he wasn't.
Yeah.
Right? It's trying to be honest about it. So he appreciated that, the fact that it didn't put him up, but at the same time, he was taken by the fact that it was it was so personal. But he appreciated that too, the honesty, I think, of it. My mum, is very much like, she's cool. She's kind of like, she was in the other film, The Imam, and she was kind of the central character. So she knew, it's like, fine, I'm going to say what I need to say, and then he does his thing. I'm going to get on with life. For her, obviously, life is, bigger than cinema. So she kind of gets on with her life. My dad was a bit more cautious, like, how am I going to be represented? But he was happy. And my siblings are in the film, and my younger brother, Jihad. So there's a story of his birth and when he was named Jihad. He was given this name Jihad in 1980. And then, he's a grown man. He's like 6 foot tall. He teaches archery on horseback, right, to kids, English kids. And he is like Jihad. He's like doing the most jihadi thing you could do. And his name is Jihad. So in the climate in the UK with these kind of young Muslims, it's not an easy space to be. So he was, I interviewed him for the film, and it didn't make the film. So he said, like, what happened to my But he has a space in the film. And so, overall, they are happy, and they kind of, I still have to speak to my dad. I still have to sit with him, because I never sat with him and watched the film together. My big dream was to go be at a festival and invite him, and we sit together and watch the film. Here's my kind of love letter to you. But it hasn't happened yet, because pandemic and stuck here. So
of course.
Yeah, so I still have to, I think he's still also processing it. He watched it for the first time in April, and he had his comments and but there's something about it that I think he's still processing.
All right.
It's all good.
All right. I would just like to also take this moment just to quickly remind everyone that if they have any questions, please send them through and we'll have them asked during the session. All right. Now, you just mentioned an editing choice, cutting the scene with a friend. And of course, you made you made the choice to edit that out. Was it because of the film taking a different life than you expected, or was it just a stylistic choice?
Which scene are you talking about? The cutting scene with the friend?
The one you just referred to right now, where you cut it and then he called you. Yeah.
Yeah, my younger brother. Yeah. I mean,
your brother.
Yeah, I mean, so I set him up in a kind of traditional interview space, right? He's sitting down, there's the camera on him, and there's a background, and we have this whole interview. And it's really good. It's like a lot of the things we talk about, we never spoke about before, about my dad and how he was busy with, this undercover double life that we didn't know anything about. And so it's quite a nice interview, actually. But it, if you've seen the film, it's not the style of the film. And so at some point, I wanted to get the interview, but when I was cutting, it didn't seem right to go to a kind of classical interview space. and not that I'm against that. You know, many filmmakers, especially first-time filmmakers, come into or we discuss like what kind of film they want to make, and they're like, I don't want any interviews. It can't be like this thing, you know. That's old style. It's boring. I don't want to do that. And I'm like, why not? I don't mind. You know, if someone's compelling on screen, they're telling you a story. I don't mind watching someone for a long time talking.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem with that. So you've got to ask yourself why you want to do that. Usually it's because I don't want to do something that everyone else has done before, right? It's always this idea of the filmmaker wanting to be different or wanting to
bringing something new to the ball.
Exactly. And that is not, you know, if you put that on yourself, it's quite a big thing to carry because you need to just be true to the story. And if the story calls for an interview, then show us the interview, right? In my case, the film, I set up these series of conversations with my dad in his office that weren't kind of interview, they were conversations. And they were me kind of exploring his space. And one of the restrictions I put on myself in the making of the film was to make everything in the office. I wanted to tell this whole kind of 40-year story, political, you know, exile story in this space where I kind of grew up never having access to my dad's study with all the books and all the stuff. And so that's a restriction I put on myself. So in that case, in that sense, cutting to jihad in an interview space, completely different, wouldn't make sense. Visually, you know, it kind of breaks it. So it didn't make it. I should look at the interview. I don't know. Maybe there's enough there to make a short film about him.
Yeah, and remember to credit me. Give me a writing edits, writing credits or something.
Credits are cheap. I'll write that down.
Yeah, and then so you spoke about style. And, you know, some people can even see your style. They understand your editing language. They watch a movie. They can just see Khalid edited this. How would you define how would you describe your style?
I haven't really thought about it. I mean, it's not that I go out to have a style, but it's just things that that I'm used to working with. Right, so I like to work with music. There is a strong intention of why I set up this interview here with records in the back, right? To refer to the fact that, you know, when I was younger in my UK days, I used to DJ, right? And there's you know, when you mix your beat matching, I guess. And you're also selecting, like what comes before the other. What are you juxtaposing which track with the next? And what story are you telling with this set you're playing? Sometimes you mix, right, beat on beat, and sometimes you're selecting track for track. And that's very much the editing process. And it's it's what I go with. And kind of years of doing that as a kid or as a teenager, I guess gave me a muscle memory for juxtaposition and matching. Yeah. So I think a lot of that in the editing process is related to how we understand music and so that talks about a style, right? That talks about style. I think one of the other things that allows me to have my own voice is that directors that I work with are kind enough to let me run with it. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
So there's an element of trust that, okay, I need to make this film. I need Khalid to help me. And so they will trust me to kind of do what I want, to play around. Some directors have a very specific idea of how they want the thing cut. And then we cut it that way, but I'll still try and put in my thing. It often happens when the director who has a very strong idea of how they want the film to run is not with me in the edit. So sometimes they're off for a few days, and then I can start to do my own thing, just to try stuff out. And often I can't help myself. I have to and then just let it play. And usually it works. And then I show it to the director, and they're like, "Well, this is nice." And it's nice to have that surprise with the filmmaker. It's nice to allow the editor to flex, right? And then to be surprised and to be pleasantly surprised by whatever's coming out. And then it becomes more of a conversation and less of a directing, yeah? So the role of director and editor starts to fall away, and you become comrades and you become collaborators, yeah? And then you can play, right? Then you can say, then often the director, is stuck. I don't know what to do with this scene, or I don't know how to structure this. And then I would say, okay, let me try some things out. Yeah, so then the voice starts to come in.
Yeah. Now, in other sessions, I can't remember which one exactly, someone spoke about the politics of representation versus representing the politics. And where do you stand as an editor, or rather as a filmmaker, in your approach when you have these new projects, or when you're working on a project? What are you more concerned about, if at all?
Yeah. So representational politics or politics of representation? Well, it depends what kind. If it's, say, take my film, Stray Dogs.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a bit of both. It's always, I guess, representation of the politics of representation is more important than the representation of politics. Because with politics and with whether Gaddafi was good or bad, whether my dad, was on the right side or the wrong side, should he not have just supported Gaddafi actually if he was such a kind of benevolent socialist? Right? Why didn't he just support him? Why didn't he work with him against the West, or whatever that whole mission was? That's something else. That kind of really comes from the characters. So I have to be honest to what the characters want, or what my dad what his politics are. Yeah. So regardless of my politics with Gaddafi and the West and my dad, he needs to tell us what his politics are, and then allow that. So his politics is represented, and if it's represented in an honest way for him, that's my the way that my politics of representation work. Does that make sense? Kind of two and two. So there was a big conversation I had with Stephen and the producer and Jihan Al-Tahiri. We spoke about my dad's politics, when he was before Gaddafi came into power and after Gaddafi came into power, and when my dad started to take up an armed struggle against Gaddafi, what were those politics? What was going on? Yeah, what was his belief system? So there's a section in the film that points to that specifically and allows my dad to say whether it's complex or not, whether you understand the Islamic Brotherhood or not, and nationalism within the kind of Arab world, Libya specifically. It's more about allowing him that space to spell it out. Yeah. And so, like I said before, by not putting my dad on a pedestal, he is the savior of Libya, look how great my dad was, I'm representing him accurately, right?
Yeah.
I could have made, there are films about Gaddafi that are very much pro-Gaddafi. There was a film made by Storyville, right, in the UK, it's called Mad Dog Gaddafi, about the madness of Gaddafi. And it's very much a voyeuristic, sensationalist look at Gaddafi. Yeah, so it's representing him in a way, it's also problematic, right, how they represented him. So, yeah, I think, like what I said, if I allow the character to represent their own politics properly, then that's my politics of representation happening.
Yeah. And I think maybe editing starts way even before you're in the edit suit.
Yeah.
When I look at the title itself, was it an easy one to choose? the Colonel Stray Dogs and all the references that it implies. So, like, maybe could you elaborate more on the title and everything?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the initial title was Baba and the Colonel, which was, how I call my dad Baba. That's how we referred to him. And then the film was going to be about those bunch of exiled Libyans who started this opposition movement to Gaddafi in exile. And Gaddafi, Gaddafi almost named the film himself because he put out this interdict that the stray dogs, eliminate them wherever you find them. So,
of course, my
dad's official designation by the Gaddafi state was stray dog, a dal, Ashur Shamis. So that kind of made sense. That made sense. And I think even up to now, even up to the end when we're trying to finish it, there were questions around, should this be the right title? And, a title of a film is always a tricky thing and is always kind of changing. And often the director wants to stay with something close to them, but sometimes it doesn't speak to the film. What does it do? The Colonel Stray Dogs, it puts Gaddafi at the center of the film when he's not really. Yeah, he isn't. He's kind of peripheral character, but at the same time, and it kind of just sounds intriguing, I guess. What is this Stray Dogs thing? There are many films. If you search Stray Dogs, you find like a dozen films called Stray Dogs because it has a meaning. It has this own kind of thing, and there are no, as someone pointed out, there are no dogs in the film.
Of course.
What does it mean? So a literary, it's to do with how Gaddafi. I spoke to. There are quite a bunch of us who are the kids of the stray dogs, right? Who are living in the diaspora. The Libyan, the kids of these guys who were exiled and Gaddafi was after them, and we refer to ourselves as the stray puppies. So maybe could have been that.
I see. All right. And in terms of your creative, artistic license, if I may call it that, where do you think, as an editor, how much of that do you exercise?
As much as I can. I kind of push it. I want to push it as much as I can. In the film now I'm making, editing, there's a James Brown song that I put on the end of the film because it really works with this scene. But the producer's like, look, we're not even going to have that discussion. We're never going to make it. It's like too expensive. It's not going to stay, right? But I'm like, okay, for now it's staying until you find it all. Staying, and then we will change it. And I'm cool because I've seen it enough times to get it out of my system that it needs to be there. But it's James Brown and it's going to cost a lot of money.
A lot of money.
It's got to go. It's fine. So I'm gearing myself up to lose it. But at the same time, I'll always try something that pushes my own kind of artistic. I'll always try something. And I think it's about how you negotiate the time and space to do that with the director. You obviously not at the end, the last week of a 10-week edit. You don't say, I want to try all these new things.
Of course,
it's like early on, right? When there's time and space, or when the director's not there, because you're often discussing other stuff and you're trying to figure stuff out together. You need that time together, but you need that time on your own in order actually just for that. To do stuff that needs to be done in the cut, but also to express yourself, to bring in new elements, to try different music. So as much as you can as a cutter, push that, because that's how you learn the craft. That's how you learn yourself. That's how you get quicker on the keyboard, right?
Yep.
That's how you learn to kind of hold the space and control the space. So as much as you can, push it.
Now we have a question. Someone wants to know, how much does one of the soundtracks cost?
It varies. There's no kind of figure. There's no specific figure in it. If you work with a composer, depends who they are. Depends what they want to charge. So a composer who's building a score, and soundtrack within it, it could be anywhere between 30,000 Rand and, I don't know, 100,000. Depends who you're working with. Obviously, like commercial music, you have to pay commercial rates. And even then, they're staggered. Like there are rates for festival release only. Then there's a rate for a broadcast. If it's going to be broadcast on TV, there's a rate for theatrical release. So it's more like a producer's question. For me,
all right.
I kind of use, I'm cautious because you also don't want to be cutting to James Brown the whole time and then have to replace it because you get used to this style and a sound. So I don't know the answer to that.
All right. So earlier on, we had a session about sound design for films, and I'm interested in the relationship between editor and someone that works in sound, especially just now since you just mentioned, making usage of songs and that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do as much as I can. I try to build a soundscape within the film as we're cutting. Yeah. So it's very much an integral part of the editing is to play with sound and to build sound. Sometimes more important than the visuals is what you're hearing and what takes you from one scene to another through sound. And nowadays it's much easier to work with sound and layers of sound as you're cutting rather than waiting until the offline is done and then you pass it on to like a sound designer. But if it's someone who, the sound mix is one thing and you might have notes. I mean, some things I can't do. I can't add reverb to a specific thing to sustain a note for a long time. So I would need a sound person, or I'd make that note, the sound mix to incorporate that. But the other thing is working with a composer or with a musician as you're constructing both score and soundtrack, right, for the film. So that it needs to happen early, not or like midway through the editing process, or earlier if you can, so that you're used, that whatever music you're using as reference is closer to the music that the musician can make. Or so yeah, it's very much integral part of the process. But if you're working with music and a composer, then the earlier they're better that they're in the process with you.
Nice, thank you. All right, and then did you also, again, what choices did you make for the Colonel's Stray Dogs in terms of music and sound?
Okay, well, sound, the sound element was, like I said, very integral in the editing. So it comes from a lot of the archival material that has its own sound in the breakup and in kind of the tone of it, and in the like a song, a musical element from Libyan TV in the 80s. I'll use it, right? So however that sounds. There's these fanfares of the French national anthem and the Libyan anthem that are played. But when it comes to the score, which is quite a particular score, and it's quite unique in itself, that was built by Tiago Correa Paulo. So I don't know, you probably won't like it if I mention 340 Mil, but he, big part of 340 Mil, and he scores lots of films, and he's a cineast, so he really understands cinema, film language. And and I've worked with him on many films before, so it was definitely a choice that I wanted to work with him on the music. So I gave him a couple of ideas of what I wanted for the score, but then he just watched versions of the film or sections, and then he just built stuff. Yeah. And then so there's that trust and that collaboration, and I liked it. I liked a lot of the stuff. Obviously, there's always a negotiation. Can you less of this or less of that? And so if a composer's making a track, a song, maybe there's like 4 or 5 instruments they're using. I would always ask in the edit for the stems, right, for the separate elements of the music, so that I can also play with it myself and extend and loop stuff and lose stuff and add, you know, and sometimes he'll make a song for a specific piece, part of the film that I would use elsewhere, actually. Right. So there's this constant process. So a lot of it was trust, working with Tiago and allowing him to also flex in that part of the film.
Yeah. And then perhaps quite a very general question. I would really love to know, what is editing to you?
Editing, to me, I guess it's time travel, right?
Yep.
And it is troubleshooting. Yeah. It's a way of, you know, you're figuring out problems. And there's something in when you figure out a problem, whatever it is in life or in the edit, you know, there's a kind of a better sense of self after that. And I think and you're continuously figuring out your troubleshooting. But I think I like the idea of editing as time travel, right? Especially when we're in such a time and a place when we're very much stationary, we're in lockdown, right? And the idea of travel is also like a dream for most of us anyway nowadays. And it's a nice way to learn about history, to come in and out of history, to think about futures, alternative futures, possible futures, and as well as the present and how to stretch time and to play with it. So it's a space to, you know, it's a space to pause, to regroup with yourself and to rewrite ideas and to play, right? To play with material and sound and ideas.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you
for engaging us and for sharing so much knowledge. I want to call it, there's a word, I can't remember the word right now. Wealth of knowledge, very profound. And we're also very happy that we have your film on second right now. So people can still watch it until, TIFF runs until Sunday. Yeah. So if you haven't seen it, Colonel Stray Dogs, stream it for free. Anyway, what will be your, yes?
If you want to get the score, Tiago's score for the film is available on Bandcamp. It's not very expensive, but you can listen to it, and he's also changed it in a way. So that's quite a nice thing to listen to separate from the film. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Can you please repeat that? Where do we get it? Maybe we can write it on the chat box.
You got to look for Tiago Correa Paulo Bandcamp.
Bandcamp.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bandcamp. You'll find it. Look for, maybe search for Colonel Stray Dogs Bandcamp. You'll find
All right. All right. We'll do that. Yeah, like I said earlier on, you've got until Sunday to watch the Colonel's Stray Dogs along with other titles. Thank you very much, Khalid, and thank you to our audiences and everyone who tuned in. Please have yourself a lovely day further.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.